Okay, hi everyone, welcome. Hi Tamara, thanks for, and Colleen, thanks for your messages in the chat. I think we'll start. I'm sure others will join us as the webinar proceeds. But I'm Claire Fincham from SAPEX and joined by my colleagues from the SAPEX team. Before I welcome Yogan officially, I wanted to give you all a little bit of very short background as to why SAPEX started the Small Business Hub Initiative, otherwise known as our SMME project. We started it last year in 2021, and we realized that there was a lot of support for small businesses in South Africa with financial guidance, HR guidance, training in funding, submitting tenders, but we felt that there wasn't a huge offering of assistance to small businesses with their supply chain management operations requirements. So we put together a series of webinars and put in place various mentors who are ready and able to support our SME Small Business Hub members. Membership is only 2,200 Rand per member for a 12-month period, and the benefits are quite substantial. I will send an email to the small businesses after the webinar, giving them information on that, and we'll put the link in the chat a bit later so you can also keep that and look at it after the webinar. We also appeal to our corporate partners and stakeholders who have joined the call today, which is great. Thank you. This is also an opportunity for your organizations to support SMEs in this function. So if you have suppliers in your supply chain, transporters, packaging companies, stationery people, and you want to assist them with having more knowledge and more resources at their beck and call, we encourage you to sponsor their membership of SAPEX in this category, and that will in turn assist your company in making sure that your suppliers are delivering on time and at good costs and things like that. And it's also very useful for your own ESD points. And so we do try to cover both sides of the spectrum of the small business hub needs and SMEs in South Africa. I'll also put my email address in the chat, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions in that regard. But I'm not going to take up any more time in that. Just to let you know that we've got 2 more events lined up between now and the end of the year. So look out for those mailings, and we appreciate your support this afternoon. Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce Yogan to you all this afternoon. You may have seen his LinkedIn profile on the invitation you received, but just in summary, he is head of procurement at TFG, the Fashini Group, which incorporates a lot of different brands that you all may know. He's an enthusiastic procurement professional specializing in strategic sourcing. Before that, he was at Woolworths. And if you're interested in connecting with him, I'm sure he wouldn't mind you reaching out to him on LinkedIn. And I'm going to hand over to Yogan now. If you have any questions, would you mind keeping them until the end? And Tanya Lamb from SAPEX will manage the question and the answers. And just raise your hand or put your question in the chat. And we look forward to some interaction at the end of Yogan's presentation. Thanks very much, everybody. Over to you, Yogan.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Hello, everyone. Very nice to be given this opportunity today to talk to you about this particular topic. I'm very passionate about it. My screen or my camera is here, but my screen is here. So I thought that I will just turn on my camera just for a little bit so everybody can get a glimpse in terms of what I look like before we get stuck into the presentation. Claire, just to confirm, you are seeing my presentation now in full screen mode. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Let me try and get the video off. Okay. All right, cool. So let's go. I think there is sufficient time in this presentation. I'll get through my slides at least in about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. So there should be enough time for us to get stuck into any question and answers at the end. And yeah, so a little bit about what we're going to speak about today. Start a little bit about me, who I am. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about my value equation. I'll share with you a little bit what's top of mind for some of CPOs globally, and how does that then compare to some of our KPIs locally. Then I'll speak a little bit about how we go about understanding the landscape in terms of our environment and our spend. And then how do we put together a high-level strategy, and then it's about executing it. Then happy to take some questions thereafter. Okay, so moving on, a little bit about me. I've got more than 18 years experience in procurement and strategic sourcing. Like I mentioned, I specialize in transformational procurement. I enjoy setting up procurement functions, more importantly, centralized procurement functions. And I've worked on, numerous systems over the number of years. Some of them are listed like the Oracle, SAP. I've implemented SAP Ariba and Coupa, and also had the luxury of working on Zycus. So if we look at the global tools and ERPs in the market at the moment, those probably are amongst the top 3 globally at present. When I moved to Cape Town a few years ago, I was requested to chair the SIPS branch, and I did that for a few years. So I've managed to lead that portfolio, getting involved with public sector, private sector, and talking about some of the challenges that we have in the environment, in our industries, across industries. How do we address job creation, et cetera, et cetera. So like I said, I'm very passionate about this. A little bit more about me is from a qualification perspective, I'm actually qualified in IT, got an MCSE qualification, A+, N+ on the network side. I'm also certified sub-BW specialist. And for my sins on BW, I was introduced to the procurement and then fell in love with that as a career, and I am now a chartered MSIPS. So a little bit about the organizations that I've worked for. You can see that I started off in financial services, spent a little bit of time in the insurance sector at Santam Sanlam, and then went across to Woolworths, and now, as Claire has introduced me, I'm at TFG. So over the number of years I've spent across these organizations, I really cut my teeth in financial services, and it's taught me a hell of a lot to date. I'm an avid Formula One fan, so I support the AMG Petronas Formula One team, and I'm also a Manchester United fan. So that's it about me. Moving on, I thought I would open up with the procurement value equation and how I use this value equation to sell the function, not only to our board and other key stakeholders, but to sell the function in general. One of the biggest questions that we get is, what are you going to do differently that we can't do? Why should I come and engage with procurement? How is procurement going to deliver value for me? Simply put, because I'm a motorsport enthusiast, I remember it as Audi over VW. And Audi over VW means the following: QQIS over TCR. TCR. So QQIS, what does it stand for? quality, quantity, innovation, and sustainability. Sustainability broken up into our green procurement, sustainability in general, as well as transformation. And then TCR is broken up into time, total cost, which is TCO models, and then risk. That's the equation. So basically, if I increase the numerator, I'm adding value to the organization. And if I decrease the denominator, I'm adding value to the organization. So simply put, that's what and how I actually try to sell the function. By improving quality, improving the quantities that we are buying, driving innovation, and also trying to improve our numbers from a transformation and sustainability perspective, adding value to an organization. And obviously the flip side of it is that if we try and reduce total cost of ownership, or we are reducing time, in many instances in the retail space, it's all about time, speed to market. So we try and take out those inefficiencies in our supply chain. We're adding value to the business, and at the same time, we obviously need to try and mitigate and reduce risk. I thought at this point I would also be in a position to share some of the research that I've come across. One of the sources that I quite frequently enjoy researching or bringing myself up to speed with is this GEP Procurement CPO survey, and the latest one that was done now this year in 2022 was done by a research company, and you can see that there was over 100 procurement, supply chain, and risk management individuals from across the United States and Canada to generate some of the findings that we have now. And what this is pointing out is, how do CPOs in other organizations across different regions, what are they concentrating on? What is top of mind for them presently? And in the next slide, I will show you how does that then compare to what are some of the things that are top of mind for us in my environment. What's quite important is that you can see that there's a lot of time and focus being spent on process improvement, and that's where the value equation comes into place. Minimizing supply chain disruption, that's always top of mind. Again, that's time and efficiency and risk associated with that. Improving sustainability, that's where that innovation and sustainability comes in, etc., etc. And you can see that from most procurement organizations deliver hard dollars. So savings is something that is, I wouldn't say that it's deprioritized, but it's not top of mind at least in the top 3, 4, 5 areas of where traditional procurement functions used to be at. So we have transitioned now from a cost-saving organization to a value-driven organization. So how does it then compare to some of the organizations' KPIs and what's top of mind for us locally? So value, like I spoke about, value delivery is one of the areas and key KPIs for the organizations to continuously look at. Cost and total cost is always going to be there. Risk mitigation and compliance is going to be there. And, for today, it's around sustainability. But more important, we want to double click onto the sustainability and understand the transformation aspect of sustainability, which is what I'm going to get to later. But then the last and most probably impactful one is customer satisfaction, because procurement divisions are service divisions and we act on behalf of our customers and key stakeholders, and in this case, the business units that we represent. So moving on in terms of, what does sustainability and transformation mean? Codes of good practice, enterprise and supply development, preferential procurement is such a top of mind discussion for most organizations and obviously importantly for procurement organizations. Preferential procurement, the scorecards, rating agencies, do we have contracts with the right service providers? What does our BBBEE spend look like, etc., etc. Okay, so I'm going to try and hopefully unpack for you a little bit today from a lens, purely from a procurement team perspective, in terms of what does our spend data say to us? What does it mean? How do we want to work with certain suppliers? How do we determine at a very high level which suppliers should we be engaging with in our more strategic discussions and progress some of that into our environment? Okay, so how do you get that preferred status? So over the last few years, in the functions that I've been leading and the time that I've spent in Cape Town, a lot of these topics have been provided in terms of feedback sessions from suppliers, and all of this data that I've been putting up onto this slide is information that was collected pre-COVID. And one of the most important or key feedback that we get from suppliers at the moment to procurement divisions is that we don't get enough access to market. We're not creating, or procurement divisions, organizations, corporates are not creating enough access to market for these EMEs, small businesses. Okay. The other feedback that we received was we are good enough for ESD programs and development, but not good enough for work to be given. So what does it mean? And I couldn't understand this until we started to engage with more and more smaller businesses and companies. And what does this mean? So a lot of companies in South Africa at the moment have got an ESD program, a formal program, and this is a program where they will spend time and money to invest in coaches and invest into formal finance programs to teach entrepreneurs how to manage their finances, bring them up to speed in terms of accounting packages, how to manage and run your business, etc., etc. And most of these individuals that are entrepreneurs are obviously individuals that come from a rich heritage and background and experience and exposure from corporate functions, and now they've transitioned into running their own businesses. So they've already have that knowledge and understanding in terms of what they should be doing. However, they've evidenced that they are part of their organizations running in the manner in which they are running is it's been through that phase of the teething phase of where companies have made mistakes and have moved past the times where they're actually running a profitable business, but it's frowned upon from a procurement division or the procurement process when we look into references, when we look into the amount of years that you are in existence, and we find that it's too risky for us to be putting work with these EMEs and possibly even QSs at the time. So they're saying they don't want to be involved in these formal programs any longer. They want to be given work. Barriers to entry, self-explanatory. From a procurement perspective, we should be having a very, very strong outlook in terms of preventing barriers to entry, identifying these barriers in organizations, in our functions, working with our business, and creating an opportunity for these small businesses to be included into our process. Another one that comes up is existing relationships. There's a lot of decisions that's being made in business that sits outside of proper governance. It's existing relationships that exist in business, and we need to strive to ensure that we understand that there's fact-based decision making that is being done when it comes to renewal of contracts, appointing of a supplier. There's evaluation criteria that we have in place, and there's a clear and governed process that we have executed that supports the appointment of service providers, as opposed to making a gut call or I've had a long-standing relationship with this particular supplier. It needs to be based on facts. The quality of feedback is poor from organizations in the tender feedback. I don't know whether many organizations are providing feedback through to their smaller suppliers. In general, we try and encourage feedback given, a lot more detailed feedback given through to small business so that they can understand where they need to improve their proposals, where they have fallen short, help them understand how the evaluation criteria has come together, what are some of the weightings of the evaluation, and how does that then relate to the proposals that we've received. And we spend some of that time educating these service providers so that their tender processes and tender documents can improve when they go forward. I think that speaks to the next point as well, how we can improve our proposals. And then exclusivity. Exclusivity is not something that I am particularly fond of. I think exclusivity, especially for small businesses, it prevents that business from growing. Because if you have an exclusive agreement in place with any organization, or if you're a service provider and you have an exclusive agreement in place, it limits your growth. And for me, I think that is a indicator of where maybe corporate organizations aren't fully aligned through to the codes of good practice and through to the transformation aspect of it, because the more that we are able to support small businesses and the rate at which they grow, it means that they are employing people, we're doing job creation, etc., and we're actually ticking all of the right boxes, as opposed to us being ring-fenced and not allowing other businesses, other industries in the market to acquire those services from small business. So procurement findings, what I found in particular is that EMEs and QSEs are more likely to give you improved SLAs in comparison to more traditional service providers, more established service providers, or service providers that are very stuck in their offering, in their routine, as well as where we find that we need to procure products or services from global organizations that have a presence in other countries. We're importing some of these things. There's a rigidity in terms of how their product offering, their post implementation support. It's fixed, and what you see is what you get, and that's what you pay. What we found is that local suppliers have similar capability, but they're most likely to give you much quicker turnaround, dedicated teams, more improved response time, etc. So it's quite evident that if we spend some time to understand how we can work with these EMEs and QSEs, we are able to at least get very close to 70, 75, in some cases even 80% of where a traditional service provider, generic, large international service provider is presently at. I also wanted to speak a little bit about the cost of transformation. So a lot of the feedback that we get is that from business and in corporates in particular is that how much more is it going to cost me to deal with an EMEA? You know, there's this myth that you're going to pay a premium if you're dealing with a small business, because their costings or their cost models or their access to market and their supply chains isn't as robust as it needs to be. And what we found is, you know, in some cases it is true. But in most cases, these small businesses are cost competitive, and we are able to negotiate with them and make them understand that from a total cost of ownership perspective, it's important to enter into a new organization at a competitive rate, and then we can work and build that service or that product with them over a period of time. So in some instances, what I end up doing with my team and with the business through our tender processes or through our engagement model, or what we call our cross-functional sourcing teams, we have a look at the baseline cost. We understand that the total cost over a period of time is going to be R1 million, for instance. And the new service provider that we want to bring in, if in this case is going to be an EME, is going to cost us 1.1 million rand, for instance. So what we say to the business is that in year one, we are going to experience higher than normal cost, but then in year two of, you know, post 12 months of this contract, we start working with the service provider. So the service provider in the first year understands the environment, familiarizes itself with the ordering patterns. They get used to the business, they build relationships, they understand the ordering patterns, etc., and they are now able to understand and identify efficiencies not only on their side of the business, but also on our side of the business, and they can then drive that cost, that total cost down further. So what we agree with the business as well as the service provider is we're going to agree an increase in year 1 that's more than what it should be, but in year 2 and year 3 I want to see a benefit in value in reduction over the total period of time. And that's quite a neat area of trying to improve the opportunities for small business into large corporates. Innovative and flexible. I think I spoke to it in the first point when I was talking around SLAs. So we find that these companies, smaller businesses, can give you as important and as stringent and robust SLAs, and they are a lot more innovative and flexible to their models and willing to negotiate and put something in place that works for the client or the customer. Easier to contract with, absolutely. There's no roadblocks or potential roadblocks and large back and forth negotiations around legal clauses. So it's easier to contract with these service providers. Quicker turnaround customer response, as I spoke to as well. And then the willingness to partner and collaborate with other companies. And what I mean by this is that if we take an example in furniture, and we've got a small service provider that is manufacturing the chairs for us, and they do the seat and they do the backrest. And there's another service provider that they outsource to produce the wheels that then get attached to the chair. So what we end up doing is that, guys, it doesn't make sense for us to have 2 separate contracts. Can we then consolidate these this into one entity? And you'll find that when you identify service providers that can complement each other like that, they are more willing to come together under one roof and under one organization. And there's a new company that is then created, and then you manage to manage that risk, increase their volume, etc., etc. So they're very willing to collaborate in many different ways, as opposed to well-established businesses, etc., who will only look at that as an acquisition or a merger. Moving on. So this is maybe getting into the nitty-gritty of stuff, and I'm going to try and speed up now. So looking at the spend, and this is just illustrative numbers, just so that we can spend a little bit of time so you can understand the thinking behind it. So if we have a total spend of 1.5 billion, we segment that total spend into what is addressable and what's not addressable. So addressable spend is where we can do something about it, we can influence it. Non-addressable spend is when we classify non-addressable spend. It either means that there's a contract in place at the moment, so we can't immediately address that spend, or it is sitting with a municipality, or there's rates and taxes, something that we can't actually influence from a competitive process. So we segment that spend into those 2 buckets, and then we further then start to zone in and have a look at how we're going to further understand the landscape from the billion rands that is addressable. What I end up doing, and I like to do with my team, is to break it out into, again, it's an illustrative example, break it out and classify the spend into the different areas that we have. So now I've taken the billion rands and I've further broken it down into logistics, corporate services, infotech, marketing, and pro fees as an example. Each of the areas have 200 million allocated to them. And then we further break that down into how much of the logistics expenses are transport, storage, fleet, and other, and then further break that lens down into the different BE levels that we have from a supplier perspective. And once I've got that level of visibility, it then also assists me in putting together some high-level strategies, and I'll speak to that on a further slide. But what this slide is doing is that it's creating a landscape, a very high level overview of where does my spend sit, with which suppliers, how many suppliers, and of those suppliers, what are the transformation of the BBBEE scorecard look like. What I also like to encourage my team to do is to put together a supplier segmentation model. So let's take our supplier base and let's use the old CRI-check matrix model and try and segment it into this supply risk versus potential value to add model, so that we can segment our suppliers into bottleneck, strategic, leverage, and routine. And what I liked about the slide is that Coca-Cola did it very nicely. So I just pasted it in there instead of me putting the information there and trying to give you a flair to it. I think it was so nice the way that they've positioned it. The different factors has taken into account to then categorize these or segment these suppliers into bottleneck, strategic, leverage, and routine. And what this does is, if we look at, let's look at routine, for instance. On the y-axis, we've got supply risk, low and high. And a routine supplier is from a risk perspective, they're low risk, and they're adding, the potential to add value is low. So the type of contracts that we're going to put in place with a routine supplier is very different to the type of contract we're going to put in with a strategic supplier. So strategic supplier, as you can see under characteristics, it's a long-term relationship that we have with a supplier, profitable growth, etc., etc. It's a supplier that if anything happens to them, it's going to impact our revenue stream. So the type of contract that we're going to have with them is going to be a comprehensive contract. It's one that's going to take care of business continuity. There has to be business continuity plans in place. There has to be clauses in place that protects our data if we're sharing data with that particular entity, or cyber clauses, etc., etc. Whereas a routine supplier could be something like stationary. It's low risk, low potential in terms of adding value. We don't want to have a long-term contract with these suppliers. The market is mature. Tomorrow we could move away from a supplier A to supplier B. So we want to limit the amount of contract period, because we want to competitively ensure that we're getting the best price for a routine supplier. So once we have that segmentation of the supplier, we obviously have the different points to then delve into to understand the detail. And like I was alluding to previously, when we look at the period for these contracts, one of the clauses that we now include in our contracts going forward is a BBBEE, a minimum BE clause. It's a requirements clause. So this is in the event where we identify either a supplier that falls into any one of these segmentation boxes. We try and understand from them if they're a non-transform supplier, or if they're a supplier that is level 5, 6, 7, and 8, or doesn't even have a verification that is done. The clause is quite clear, and it says that we need to agree over a period of time that at least you're going to get a verification done, so you can get a transformation or you can get a valid certificate. But we need to understand that plan, and we need to ensure that at the bare minimum you are getting to a level 4. And we've got that clause that's stipulated in there that at any period we can run that audit within that time period, and if the minimum requirements are not met, we had liberty to then move to a different supplier. So those are some of maybe the points that I could speak to that adds a little bit of value in terms of what we're doing to help and drive some of the discussions with our suppliers presently. Then I like to do a supplier preference model again. And what this does is, this is from a supplier's perspective. This is trying for me to put a different lens on it and try and understand from where does a supplier fall into place. How much of time am I going to spend with these particular suppliers? So on the previous slide, we were looking at it from a risk perspective, but on this slide, we're actually looking at how attractiveness, or the attractive nature of this account is to the supplier. And if the supplier views us as a nuisance, for instance, then it's going to be, it's not it's going to be difficult for, we're not going to be, you know, priority for them is what I'm trying to say. And I also this is I do it from a supplier perspective, and I try to understand where does the supplier actually plot me and where do I plot them. And I think if we're looking at from an EME perspective and a small business perspective, EME and a QSE, I think what I like to use this for, and I sometimes I use it, you know, very differently to what it's traditionally made for, is that I try and understand, as a supplier, where do you think the company plots you, and where do you plot the company that you're trying to get pieces of work from? Because many instances, procurement divisions view the companies in very different places. Suppliers may think they are core to the company, and from a procurement division perspective, we may think they're a nuisance, as an example. So I think it's quite important that you actually understand from a supplier perspective, where do you see yourself, and more importantly, where does the organization see you? Coming back to this overview now, and you know, now that we've got this landscape in place, what is it actually saying to us, and then how do we go about developing a strategy in place at a high level that will get us moving in the right direction? So what the stats are saying, what does the stats say? We've got a total addressable spend of R1 billion, and from a total supplier perspective of that R1 billion, we've got roughly 200 suppliers, right? So from an 80-20 principle, 800 million, in theory, we should have at least 40 suppliers that will give us the, you know, the best practice at a high level. But in this example, we've got 60 suppliers. So immediately there's two things that stands out. One is there's an opportunity for us to further consolidate our top 60 suppliers to get down and closer to that 40 supplier number. And the second point is that all suppliers from supplier 61 all the way up to the 198, there's a potential transformation opportunity there. We can either consolidate it, depending on the commodity that these suppliers fall into. So I could then have 2 or 3 different opportunities that comes out of that supplier tail that should be earmarked and ring-fenced through to EMEs, QSEs, Black-owned, Black women-owned. And that's how we can bring more opportunities and access to market into organizations. What we also do thereafter, and what the numbers say to us, is that we'll look to start isolating all suppliers. And again, in this example, say there's about 90 odd suppliers that are below the level 4. And from a BE scorecard perspective, we all are aware that as soon as you go below level 4, we're no longer in a position to get a rand for rand. So, you know, we want to try and, as far as possible, to try and move away from any suppliers that are 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, so that's the second one. We isolate the additional 90 suppliers that are below level 4, and we try and associate and map that back through to the different areas where we need to have a transform supplier in place, or we can have a transform supplier in place. And again, in this example, if the 90 suppliers account for 80 million rand in terms of spend, there's a couple of ways that we can do it. So that 90 suppliers, we can group them up by their common services that they provide. And for instance, if they provide cleaning, we then have the ability to then apply a regional strategy to cleaning. So we can have one EME in KZN, one EME in Gauteng, one EME, 2 EMEs in the Western Cape. We have that ability. So as much as the best practice says to us that from a best practice perspective, we should be consolidating on one space. Yes, we are going to consolidate on the 80-20 principle through to our strategic suppliers where 80% of spend is, but we're also going to expand on the other side to provide more of an opportunity when it comes to EMEs and QSEs. What then it also speaks about from an opportunity perspective is that identify all suppliers that can be immediately transition to transform suppliers. And that's specifically speaking to about the suppliers that we've isolated now, of level 4 and higher. And then Black-owned, Black women-owned, either existing or new. So the second point here is that when we identify that we don't have sufficient Black-owned, Black woman-owned suppliers in a category, and we believe that we should be able to do something. This is when I look at it from a make versus buy perspective. The make versus buy scenario is that, for instance, if I look at print, and if I have got 5 printers out there in the market, and those 5 printers are non-transform printers, I then start looking at how do I go and make a Black-owned business. So how do we ensure that this particular Black-owned business we want to set up for litho print? What is the equipment that is required? What type of work from a print perspective we currently have that falls into litho printing? How much of that spend are we prepared to then allocate through to a new co? And we do that scenario comparison. If we've got to do that, what will it look like? What does the supply base look like? Is there an opportunity for us to create additional competition so that these established service providers are kept competitive, etc.? So we do that make versus buy scenario comparison. Once we've understood and executed this piece of work, I again start to use the CRI-check model a little bit different. We go back to the traditional segmentation of non-critical or routine, and then bottleneck, strategic, and leverage. And then we start to plot each one of these commodities into these areas. What this then means is that anything that falls into a non-critical space should be ring-fenced and earmarked for Black-owned, Black woman-owned EMEs, QSEs. And this forms part of the procurement strategy that then gets presented through to the board. Board endorses it, and it forms part of the formal strategy that we then look to execute with business. And there's 2 ways that you can do it. As private entities, we have the ability to ring-fence these things and to ensure that we can increase the amount of evaluation criteria or the evaluation percentage associated with the BBBEE certificates and the percentage ownership that lies with Black-owned and Black woman-owned. So that weighting goes up. And the similar thing needs to be applied through to the likes of bottleneck and leverage. Strategic is something that's going to be very at this high level, it's going to be difficult for us to do it, and therefore what I end up doing is transitioning it into waves. So once we understand how we've plotted this across the different areas, we are able to plot it in this manner, and this then speaks to what should I prioritize, when do I prioritize it. In the next 12 months, I'm going to tackle wave 1. These are the initiatives I'm going to execute. In wave 2, these are the initiatives I'm going to execute. And in wave 3, this is where the more strategic suppliers come in. And in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to ring fence anything. It just means that the strategy is going to be different and we're going to apply it different. And we'll apply wave 2 and wave 3 different in terms of how we are drafting our tender documents. Because, for instance, if we look at alarm monitoring, or if we look at card acquiring, that falls into wave 2 and wave 3, or CIT, sorry, in wave 3, we could then stipulate that X percentage of that particular contract has to be spent with an EME or QSE, or we can indicate in the RFP, let suppliers that are bidding for this piece of work, and if this piece of work is 50 million is the total cost or total value, and or 100 million, 30% of the value of this contract. Tell us who are your identified supply development partners and how you are going to actually assist them as part of that contract appointment to develop them with 30% of that particular contract. So this is maybe my planning process and what I use, and how I use the tools to put into place with my teams, and put it into different waves, and then how do we go about then executing these waves over a period of time. And in that period of time, wave 1 could be 12 months, 18 months. As an organization, you can determine what that period needs to be. And that then brings me to the end. I hope that it's given all of you some overview and value in terms of thinking and what we apply and how we go about engaging with our supply base and why we engage in that manner. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Yogan. Are there any questions? The audience is very quiet. Not a single question. Ah, there we go. Normalizo.
Sorry, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for such an informative presentation. I'd just like to find out from, I guess, not just the presenter, but anyone in the webinar. There's been recurrent feedback from suppliers that they are not being considered for contracts by companies, even though they have gone through extensive coaching and extensive ESD programs. And the presenter has gone through this as well. I'd just like to find out what the outlook is, you know, with regards to this situation post-COVID.
I think that's an open question to the floor, Tonya.
Yes.
Let's see if anybody's prepared to come forward and answer that question for us. Nothing. Gosh, everybody's very quiet today. Normally, I don't think anybody's going to come forward here. Maybe they can put something in the chat if they're not comfortable speaking up.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I'm just going to move on to a couple of questions that are coming in. Do you engage with any third-party suppliers to assist with setting up the ESD program? For example, the training and education of ESD suppliers or sourcing of ESD suppliers?
Yeah, I see that question. So where I am at the moment, we don't have a formal program, or it's not done in a formal manner. We do engage most on the merchandise side of our business, but that is something that we've identified as a gap as well, and it is something that we are looking to address in the short term. And the short term, I'm saying we've just concluded a tender to try and identify an entity that's going to help us drive it on the non-merchandise side, which is you know, the area that I head up, and we're in that final phase of providing a recommendation, you know, through to our governance forum or committee. So yes, I would, you know, it is something that we do engage with third-party suppliers to assist setting up an ESD program. And I think more organizations, some organizations in different industries have progressed it a lot sooner and have established it a lot sooner. I haven't seen it, maybe I haven't seen or heard about anything in the retail sector that is as formalized and established as I've seen in the other industries, such as financial services and insurance and so on. I think there's another question. What is that, for example, the training, education of ESG suppliers and sourcing of ESG suppliers? Yeah. So earlier on in my presentation, I did speak about that, where we have companies that have got these formalized programs in place where they've got mentors and business mentors and coaches that's assigned through to MDs or CEOs of these new entities, providing guidance, and they've got gated reviews. They send them on training and upskilling in terms of risk management, financial controls, etc., etc. It does happen. But like I said, I haven't seen in the retail sector where something is as maybe well oiled as some of the other industries. I hope that answers your question. Do you make use of BI tools to manage procurement function? Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're moving towards, we not even we're moving towards, we are in a time where without data, you know, everything is data driven. We talk about data scientists, data evangelists. There's so many names that's being, you know, utilized in the industry. So there's a number of tools that you can utilize. Like I spoke to, you know, there's a couple of tools out there. ERP tools that you can use. For instance, at TFG, we've just rolled out a new ERP tool called Cooper, and part of the Cooper modules is there's an analytics module that's with it. I don't know what other organizations use, but in my previous organizations at NetBank, we used SAP Ariba, and with SAP Ariba, there's an analytics engine there as well. A lot of these tools and ERP tools you'll find in the market at the moment have analytics tools, but I wouldn't know. You know, I think you guys need to have a look at these tools and then decide for yourself which is the one that makes best sense for your industry and your business. What's the next question? Power BI can be used to monitor supply performance. Yeah, Power BI is it's more Excel based though. So Power BI is more Excel based, meaning that it doesn't provide you with insights, right? So somebody needs to drive the analytics, and you need to get your own insights. But the tools that are being developed today and that you can purchase does both of it. So if you categorize your spend properly, these tools will give you insights. So it will tell you, for instance, that you've for this month of August, you've spent R1 million on stationery, and it'll tell you that a lot of those purchase orders created against that R1 million was for 60% of that was against the contract and 40% was outside of contract. And it'll show you the items. So the systems and the intelligence built into these systems at the moment are providing you with insights, and that's what I think is the difference between Power BI versus you know, these analytics tools and engines for me.
Thank you, Yogan. I mean, I don't know if there are any other questions, but for me, this is kind of like a minefield of data. Sorry, there's another question that's come in here now. In terms of logistics and current capacity constraints on imported cargo, how important does risk play with supplier vetting versus the other two factors in your TCR equation?
I think my response to that will be, what did you do during COVID? That then, you know, so risk in the supply chain is a massive thing, and that is why on top of every CEO at the moment is procurement and supply chain, which, you know, it kind of worked to our advantage from a career perspective, because with areas and divisions that were struggling at the moment to get time with us, all of a sudden you were top of mind. Where's my procurement division? Who is my procurement lead at the moment? You know, I want to understand, you know, what supply chain risk assessments have we done? How robust is our so I think from your perspective, I don't know who Ailey is, or, you know, which organization she's from, but you need to understand is how core is that product or service. You know, if you're looking at cargo or shipping, for instance, if you're in retail like us, it forms, you know, a major portion of what we do. If we can't get product into the country, we can't sell it. So that just explains that this is going to impact our revenue. So it'll be high on the agenda, and it'll be weighted accordingly. It'll be one of those criteria, and the processes and the vetting and all of the stuff that we go into identifying which is a partner of choice. We're going to look at all of that. Very similar again to to security in a DC, for instance, your security company that you end up employing in the DC, whenever there's going to be a strike or there's going to be a possible downtime, or there's issues with the union, what does your service provider differentiate itself so that you can still be protected under those circumstances? You still have people available. And I think for me, that speaks to the risk aspect of it, right? So it will be quite high on the supplier vetting.
So, I mean, obviously COVID is kind of like I mean, we're exhausted on that topic, I think. But I mean, we also had the flooding and the riots and things like that. So if you look at all of that together, and I imagine obviously that you do import quite a bit of stuff, how much business have you had to change or localize as a result of the impact of all those sorts of things? Because I think a lot of businesses have kind of realized the need to do a bit more onshoring or localization, and how much of your business have you had to do that with as a result of that you wouldn't have done it before, but you were forced to do it?
Yeah, it's not a straightforward question, because I think, TFG, for instance, had gone down that road. We identified a lot earlier that we've got to invest in the local market. We're going to have to start stimulating the local market, and we're going to have to try and shift some of our reliance offshore to local. And even if you look at some of our commitments that we're making to the market, and the amount of stores that we're opening, the amount of jobs that we want to create, it's all about local. So we already have a strategy in place to be less reliant on on offshore. And we're trying to resuscitate that. And I almost think that from a South Africa perspective, we need to, at some point, when we engage with government, we need to start putting our competitive advantage or competitive anti-competitiveness behind for certain areas. And I'll put it out there. If we as retailers, if TFG, Woolworths, H&M, Mr. Price, whoever they are, the retailers in South Africa, came together and said, listen, why can't we use hangers as an example? It's not doesn't drive any competitive nature between us. Why can't we establish a manufacturing facility in the country that services all of the retailers? So I think there's circumstances and there's times where we can make it work for us as a country and for the people of the country. And I think that's what we need to drive and try to establish, as opposed to looking at it as being competitors, which we are, but the hanger that TFG garment hangs on versus a garment that hangs on from a Woolworths or Mr. Price, that's the consumer's choice, and I think we need to start looking at it differently.
I think that's a great way to look at it. In the end of the day, it's all about collaboration anyway. And you're right, there are lots of areas that we can collaborate. I mean, I know during COVID, there were a lot of the FMCG organizations that worked together because they were all local businesses. And it was a case of, we can't watch them go down, or we can't watch them suffer. We need to give them a helping hand. So I think that as South Africans, I think it's kind of an inherent thing in South African people. So I want to kind of close things up. So Yogan, as a quick off the top of your head, what would be the top 3 things that you would give advice to a small business? So to give them advice and say, okay, these are the things that you should do or look out for and improve on, whatever the case is, what would they be?
I think that positioning model, that supply preference model, they need to understand, how are they viewed from an organization or that they're trying to get business from. They need to understand that, and they also need to understand what is that procurement division's KPIs. What are they trying to achieve? Because when an RFP goes to the market, we are trying to achieve, number one, our KPIs. We're trying to reduce risk, but we're also trying to drive certain of our objectives. And what I find is that most organizations don't understand the procurement team's KPIs, what they're trying to solve for, and then the proposal doesn't match what we're trying to solve for. And so maybe those 2 things, Tanya, if I could maybe leave it there. I know we're out of time, but like I said, this topic is so vast and so detailed. We need almost 2 sessions to get into the detail that we need to get to. But maybe those 2 things is what I would want to leave with service providers for them to think about.
Thank you so much, Yogan, for your time. And in terms of our audience, Yogan did say when we started that this is quite an in-depth subject, so there will be a follow-up on this. We look forward to that. I hope the session was informative for all of you. It certainly was for me, I can tell you that. And it's given you some food for thought if you're an SMME and if you're a business. You know, what can you do to make a difference in terms of helping to develop SMMEs, you know, and improve our economy, create jobs, and the things that we really need to do. So thank you for all being here with us this afternoon. We appreciate your support. And once again, Yogan, thank you for your time and such a really great presentation that I think was really, really valuable. So until next time, we will see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Yogan.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Tanya. Thanks, Yogan.
Enjoy. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye.